Tonight's program is Birding Adventures in the Central Himalayan Kingdoms of Nepal, Sikkim, and Bhutan. This is being presented by Dr. James Bland. Jim grew up in the Central California, and hence Yosemite, the West Wetlands, and the Central Coast are part of his identity. He has a lifetime passion for wild animals and holds multiple degrees in wildlife-related topics. He attended college in Northern California, CSU Humboldt, also in Wisconsin at the University of Wisconsin, and at UCLA down in Los Angeles, and he taught at Santa Monica College for more than a decade. He returned to Central California in 2021 when he retired from teaching and research. His research career centered around game birds and Himalayan forest ecology. He's a former director of the Game Bird Research Group and is a leading authority on Himalayan snowcock and Sierra sooty grouse. Since retiring, Jim has become an avid wildlife photographer. His research career is archived on his personal website, and you can see recent examples of wildlife photography on his Facebook page. And I'll be posting links to both of those in the chat so that you can check that information out. So at this time, it gives me great pleasure to turn it over to Jim, and you can take it away, Jim.
There we go. Greetings. Greetings, and thank you for taking the time to join in on this Zoomcast. I just have a couple of comments to make before we get into the slides. First, I want to thank the organizers of the Morro Bay Bird Festival for making this Zoomcast possible. And in particular, I'd like to thank Bob Revel, the gentleman who introduced me. He's doing a huge amount of work very successfully in setting up the Bird Festival and these lead up Zoom presentations. Secondly, a little mention about the photographs in my presentation. All of the photographs are mine, but not the graphics. So with the graphics, I've captured them from the internet and adapted them to my needs. With the photographs, you'll note that some of them are not my best. I don't consider them to be my best, but I included them because they help me tell a story. You also notice that some of them, I had to reach back to more than 30 years, almost 40 years into my 35 millimeter film archive to be able to tell some of the stories that I've wanted. You'll notice the discoloration, the ravages of time with those slides. And you'll also maybe know, if you're familiar with the wildlife of this area, that I won't be showing images of some of the key species there because I haven't had a chance to photograph them. Some of them are quite elusive. So with that, then we will move on to the first slide. So here we have just a general geographic orientation to the area that we'll be talking about. The Himalaya range is in color here. You can see that it's sandwiched between India and China for the most part. It is nearly 1,600 miles in length, and from on a horizontal plane on a map, it is some 200 miles from south to north on average. The countries that I will be talking about, the countries and states that I will be talking about are here: Nepal in what's referred to as the Central Himalaya, then Sikkim and Bhutan that are getting over into the Eastern Himalaya. I won't be talking about the far east or the far west, which are significantly different ecologically than the Central Himalaya. I want to mention a few things about my approach to my career, my work, as well as my approach to this presentation. I am an ecologist and geographer by training. I'm not an expert birder. My work in that part of the world has revolved around, has to do with research, experimental research, and exploration centered around birds. These days, after retirement, I basically consider myself a hobbyist wildlife photographer. My adventures in the Himalaya started back in 1982, where I attended a symposium on pheasants, an international symposium on pheasants held in Srinagar, Kashmir, in northwest India. I traveled there to present the findings of my senior thesis, college senior thesis on habitat associations of Himalayan snowcocks. These snowcocks were introduced to the Ruby Mountains of Nevada in North America, and so I was able to study them there. But having gotten a grant, a travel grant to go to this symposium, and having just finished college, I took the opportunity to spend several months in the region and truly explore to the degree possible and to the degree I could afford the Himalaya, the great diversity of landscapes and wildlife in the Himalaya. This was all done on a shoestring budget. I was basically a poor college kid. Other than the travel grant, I sold my car to have money to do these travels. And so definitely on a shoestring budget. After coming back from those adventures, I continued to study snowcocks for my master's degree in Nevada. And then in the mid 90s, I was awarded a Fulbright scholarship to return to the Himalayas to go into remote areas of northeastern Nepal in the Makalu region and work on my doctoral research there for some 2.5 years. I lived in the last village, the most remote village on the trail. Beyond that was basically unexploited forest. At that time, the village was a 7 days walk from the nearest road. I trained a local crew to help me conduct my research. In a nutshell, the objectives of my research were to study how, when local people remove woody plants from the forest for building their homes or firewood, etc., how that changed the structure and composition of the forest, and then in turn, how the small bird and small mammal communities changed as a result of changes in the forest. Some species moved in, other species moved out, and I was able to develop models, predictive models that show in terms of decades ahead what kind of changes can be anticipated with that kind of use of the forest. I made several visits after I finished my doctoral research there. In 2009, I joined my friend Chedar Sherpa to return to the Everest region, the Khumbu region, where I hadn't been for more than 30 years. It was a joy to be there with Chedar and his wife. My wife was there as well. Chedar at that time had summited Mount Everest 13 times. And so he was a very useful and knowledgeable person to be with. Unfortunately, I got high altitude sickness and had to rush down off the mountain earlier than I had planned and spend a week in a high altitude clinic in Kathmandu. In 2013, I traveled to the western portions of Yunnan province. This is in southwest China. It's basically a Tibetan landscape. I got involved in some annual waterfowl surveys that were done on the ponds and lakes in that area, but more, and also I had a chance to see that landscape, Tibetan landscape, and some of the culture that's there. In 1998, my wife Minnie and I traveled through Tibet. This was mostly just on a personal tour to become familiar with the lay of the land and have actually, experienced some Tibetan landscapes and culture. In 1999, I went to the Gaoligang range. This is the easternmost, botanically speaking, the easternmost extent of the Himalayan plants. This work was to survey a rare pheasant called Slater's Manal for the San Diego Zoological Society. In 2010, I visited Sikkim, mostly to familiarize myself with the lay of the land there, but also to visit friends and relatives and friends of friends. Most recently, this last March, my wife and I went to Bhutan on a custom wildlife photography tour, 2 weeks there. Had an absolutely wonderful time there, got a bunch of good photographs, some of which you'll be seeing today. And so let me then, before we get into the birds, let me talk very briefly about the three countries that will be that are in this region. The first, the westernmost, is Nepal. I like these satellite views at night just to kind of show the difference between developed and highly urbanized areas versus more remote areas like here in Nepal. Nepal, in terms of surface area, is some 56,000 square miles. That's about a third of California. For the Morro Bay and California participants in this Zoom cast, basically equivalent to the American state of Iowa. The population of some 30,000, slightly less than California in a third the area. But the bird species there are, again, a third more bird species diversity than we have here in California. Nepal opened its doors to tourists beginning in 1955. It was a Hindu monarchy, uniquely a Hindu monarchy, up until there was a royal massacre in 2001. After that, in 2008, after lots of struggling about what's going to happen to governance there, it became a parliamentary democracy in 2008 with no king. So Nepal is no longer one of the Himalayan kingdoms. Sikkim, very small area, just a fraction of the size of California, more the size of Delaware. A population just under 700,000, similar to our District of Columbia, Washington, D.C. Yet, even though it's just a fraction of California's size, there are nearly as many bird species there as in California. Foreigners first started visiting Sikkim in the late 1800s, if they got permission from the British Raj. The British government in India was controlling foreign relations in as much of this area that they could at the time. And Sikkim was one of the places that the foreigners were able to visit, courtesy with permission from the British. The country was a Buddhist monarchy until in 1975 there was a revolt. The people revolted against the monarch, the king, and that same year there was a referendum held, and the people voted to become a democratic state of India. So Sikkim is no longer an independent Himalayan kingdom. It is now a state of India. Bhutan, some 15,000 square miles, about a third, just a tenth the size of California, more the size of Maryland. Population of under 800,000, about the same as our state of North Dakota, yet a large number of bird species. Significantly more bird species there than we have in California. Bhutan was ruled by Buddhist priest kings until a hereditary monarchy was established in 1907. It first opened its doors to foreign tourists only in 1974. It became a parliamentary democracy in 2008 by royal decree. That is to say that the king, the last at the time of this hereditary monarchy, decided that the best form of governance for his people would be a parliamentary democracy. So the king now has a role that's similar to the British monarch. So Bhutan now is the only remaining Himalayan kingdom. Let's talk a little bit about the geography of the area, because that's important to understand how we can have the kind of bird diversity that we have there. In terms of physical geography, one of the main features that kind of dictates the diversity of plants and animals, you have this east-west precipitation gradient. So out over the Bay of Bengal in spring, you have the Indian monsoon stirring up, and it sweeps across the Himalaya from east to west, dropping huge amounts of rain in the east and then tapering off as you go further west. For example, now these examples I'm going to give are not records by any means. They just happen to be places that I'm familiar with and have some pictures to show. My study site in eastern Nepal, Chitre, for example, gets 12 feet of rain per year. And you get these amazing multi-canopied, lush, broadleaf temperate forests there. On the other hand, in Leh, Ladakh, you only get a half inch of rain per year. Also, in terms of physical geography, you have this elevation, or essentially a temperature gradient, going from the bottom of the range up to the top of the mountains to the highest peak in the world, from a few feet above sea level to the highest peak in the world. Now, different authorities divide the kind of forest ecosystems in different ways, climbing up, but you clearly have very different kinds of, subtropical, tropical, coniferous, and so forth, forest on the way up. For the purposes of this presentation, I'm dividing these, crunching these into 3 zones to simplify the presentation. You'll be hearing me talk about subtropical, temperate, and alpine zones. In addition to this physical geography, we also have to consider the biogeographic history of the region. The Himalaya region here is actually at the juncture of 2 what are called biogeographic realms, the Palearctic and the Indo-Malay. A biogeographic realm is an area where the flora and fauna have developed very differently over geological time. By that, I mean long spans of time. If we go back 200 million years, the Indian subcontinent had just broken off from the southern megacontinent Gondwana land and started heading north toward the northern megacontinent Laurasia. Some 70 million years ago, you can see here it's well on its way. And then about 50 million years ago, the Indian subcontinent crashed into the Eurasian continent and started pushing the Himalayas up at this juncture. As those mountains rose, and the Himalayas are some of the youngest mountains in the world, as those mountains rose up, various plants and animals moved into those new habitats that became available. Some plants and animals moved in from the east side. So these are plants and animals that tend to be in more moist, kind of tropical, Southeast Asian, Indo-Malaysian types moved in from the east into the Himalayas, and from the west, you have plants and animals more typical of the European mountains, the West Asian mountains, and some African elements moving in to the Himalaya range. So all of these kinds of things then resulted in globally significant biodiversity in the region. You have in the Himalaya region some 10,000 species of plants, 3,100 of which are endemic. You have some 300 species of mammals, 12 of which are endemic. Some 980 species of birds, 50 of them endemic. Just by comparison, in the United States, we have about 1,000 birds, but we have 15 times the area as the Himalaya region. Here's a quick snapshot of my personal explorations of the region. Each one of these treks I could talk about for an hour at least. I won't. I just want to give you a quick snapshot to show you that I have, over the past 40 years, covered a pretty good span of what the Himalaya has to offer geographically. So now we'll get into a series of slides here that address birds and birding destinations in the region. And I'm going to break it down into those 3 regions that I mentioned: subtropical, then moving up to temperate, and then moving up to alpine. With this first slide, I will talk a little bit about the logistics of getting to these areas. In white here, you see the 3 capital cities. You will fly into these capital cities, in a few cases from European destinations. In most cases, you'll land in some Asian major airport like New Delhi, Bangkok, Singapore, and then fly in. In the case of Nepal, if you're going to see subtropical areas, you're going to land likely, and then you'll get on what's known as the East-West Highway that you can use automobile traffic to get across the country. I should mention that these place names that are in orange are the top birding destinations that came up when I did some internet searches. I've been to many of these, not all of them, but when you see these listed across like that, keep in mind that these are the top names that come up if you do internet searches for top birding destinations in this part of the world. So for subtropical, in Nepal, you get on that highway and you go to these generally national parks, large and very well-known national parks. In Sikkim, to get there, you will land in the airport at Bagdogra, which is in West Bengal, India. And then from there, you will take an automobile for a 4 or 5 hour drive up to Gangtok. But in Sikkim, as you see, there are no subtropical birding destinations. Those would be down in West Bengal. Sikkim is a high elevation state. It doesn't reach down to subtropical destinations. In Bhutan, like Nepal, there is an east-west highway that is the most important way to get across the country. To visit these subtropical areas in Bhutan, you'll get started on that east-west highway and then drop down on branch roads to go down close to the southern border with Assam, the Assam state of India, and go to these parks and preserves to look at your subtropical critters there. These are some typical scenes you'll experience when you're in the subtropical zones of central Himalaya. Lots of big, dense jungles. This is down on the plains at the base of the mountains. You also have a number of impressive Himalayan rivers that come rushing down the south face of the Himalayas and then fan out onto the plains, either the plains of the Brahmaputra or the plains of the Indus River. This is a typical scene that you would see in Nepal in what they call the Terai. This is the lowlands on the southern border of Nepal at the foot of the Himalayas. This is what's referred to as elephant grass, a very common, abundant species of grass there. Here in this one location where this little pond was at, you've got Asian elephant, hog deer, peanut stork, Brahminy duck, and so forth. Great diversity there. These are the areas that are famous for jeep safaris. You hire a jeep or you hire an elephant for that matter in some locations and go out into these grasslands and see the charismatic megafauna, the one-horned rhinoceros, the Bengal tiger, the Asian elephant, etc. These guys. So these are the charismatic megafauna of the foot of the Himalaya. You've got Asian elephants, of which there are just some 36,000 left in the wild. You've got greater one-horned rhinoceros, of which there are just some 4,000 left. Bengal tiger, some 5,000 left. And the Asian water buffalo, just 1,000 individuals left in the wild, although you will see domesticated ones quite commonly. This is my best picture to date of tiger. This guy came down to the banks of the Brahmaputra River and soaked up the sun and rolled around in the sand. And I put on the strongest, most powerful optics I had with me and took this picture and then cropped and cropped and cropped and did all kinds of magic and eventually came up with this. Barely passable, but I will mention that in March, my wife and I are going on a photo safari in India, specifically to get pictures of tigers. So there's hope. Moving on to the birds, subtropical birds. So there are lots of species of birds there that are called various kinds of eagles. This crested serpent eagle is probably the most ornately plumaged of them. It does, in fact, spend its time hunting and eating snakes and lizards. This gray-headed fish eagle leads a life very similar to the osprey. It is, in fact, struggling with the fish here. Apparently, it got a hold of a fish that was too big for it to pull out of the water. And so when we came up to it, it was just kind of struggling there. You have a great diversity of owls in the Himalayas, including some that are diurnal, active during the day, like this Asian barred owlet and the spotted owlet. Moving on to the large land birds, you have the Indian peafowl, which is the national bird of India. You have this red jungle fowl, which is the common ancestor, the original chicken, the common ancestor of all domesticated chickens. This individual just having a jolly good time looking for undigested seeds in this fresh hunk of rhino dung. You have a number of large wading birds like storks, several species of storks, including this painted stork. You have species of cranes. This is the Saurus crane, which is a resident species along the base of the Himalayas. You also have migrating cranes, common cranes, Demoiselle cranes migrating through the area. Then we can move on to these large-billed, heavy-billed Coraciiformes, the order Coraciiformes, including woodpeckers like this black-rumped flameback, including the bucerotids, the hornbills like this great hornbill, and there are several species of hornbills in the region, and a great diversity of kingfishers like this white-breasted kingfisher. One of the fascinating groups in this region, diverse groups, is the cuckoos. This is an Indian cuckoo, similar to the European cuckoo. This is the green-billed malcoa, seen in this picture as it is most often seen, with some branches and leaves in front of it. This species has an uncanny ability to remain only partly visible, virtually never coming out in the full open for a photograph. Quite the opposite of this greater cocale that has no problem sticking out on a branch in the middle of a grassland. One of my favorite families of birds in the Himalaya when I first got there and started seeing what a diversity there is of them is the starling myna group, this Brahmini starling. There are more than, there are probably something like 6 or 7 species. The Brahmini myna might be the most delicately plumaged. The common myna you'll find around homes and other human dwellings, the jungle myna. And then there's the hill myna. I've always had a special fondness of the hill myna because as a kid, one of our neighbors had one as a pet, and it was absolutely so much personality, and these yellow wattles were really something. But the loud, very clear voice and the personality really stuck with me as a kid. So it was a delight to see them in the wild for the first time. Here we have the old world flycatchers, the muscicapitae, frequently referred to as robins or chats. These 4 species are fairly common, generally common around human dwellings: the Indian robin, the white-rumped shama, the oriental magpie robin, and the pied bush chat. Other families of birds that you'll encounter, and more or less a diversity, is, for example, the Oriolidae. Here, the black-hooded oriole as an example. There's a great diversity of sunbirds, the Nectariniidae. This is the purple sunbird. You have lots of old world warblers. This is a Psittacola in the family Psittacolidae. And you have a number of babblers there, like this cute little chestnut cap babbler. So these are very characteristic. This is in a group that's referred to as the reed warblers, or grass warblers. So these guys you can see are in these dense grasslands at the base of the Himalayas. That's their habitat. All right, so moving on to temperate birding destinations. In Nepal, you fortunately have some sites that are fairly close to Kathmandu to see a diversity of temperate trees and animals. The Polchoki Hill and Shivapuri, in that they're close to the capital city. They were pretty beat down for many years, but they were then protected, and they're improving dramatically. You can see a wide variety of temperate bird species there now easily. If you want to go a little further afield, you can use the subsidiary airport at Pokhara. There's a very large area here around Pokhara and Lake Biwa itself. And you also have the Annapurna Conservation Area, a huge protected area with lots of temperate environments to explore there. I'm actually personally not that knowledgeable about Western Nepal. When I was doing most of my work in Nepal, Western Nepal was relatively difficult to go to. The infrastructure had not been put in place. My understanding, there's been a lot of road building and some additional parks established since then. So Western Nepal is probably much more accessible than when I was there. And on this internet search for temperate regions, this Kaptad Park did come up as a very popular place for tourists to visit. In Sikkim, you will have a number of temperate environments very close to the capital city with easy drive from the capital city. Listed here. In Bhutan, again, you'll get on this east-west highway in the very good temperate environments all along the highway. These are the main bird watching areas for most bird watching tours that go through Bhutan. These are some of the typical scenes you will see in the temperate zone of the Himalayas. You're going to see, if you're there in spring, you're going to see rhododendron forests in bloom. These are not the little shrubby azaleas and rhododendrons you see in the United States. These are 20, 40-foot tall trees, making up a significant member of the forest canopy, making entire hill slopes turn red when they're in bloom. You've got the mighty Himalayan rivers coursing down through the Himalayas, providing riparian habitats and also watery habitats for birds that are moving through that are associated with water. Keep in mind that in the temperate zone of the Himalaya, in Nepal, for example, there are a lot of people there. It's very high human density. And so in the temperate zone is where you're going to find relatively few natural areas, mostly areas under cultivation. Here you can see that these terrace fields for rice go right up the slope. This little transition you see here from cultivation to forest is basically about 7,000 feet elevation. That's what's sometimes referred to as the cloud ceiling. These forests up here, if they were in the New World, would be called cloud forests. They're very often throughout the monsoon for several months just engulfed in clouds, and so that's not conducive to agricultural cultivation. If you go into more western areas in the temperate zone, you'll find areas where the forest is dominated by conifers, like this cheer pine. If you go into eastern areas where there's more precipitation, you'll find these amazing multi-storied, species-rich forest like this broadleaf evergreen forest in my study area in northeast Nepal. Canopy members including oaks of various kinds, laurels, some of which are close cousins of the avocado tree, maples. When you get down to the understory, you find usually bamboo. You can also find these big ferns growing there. Just an amazing place. So moving on to the wildlife of the temperate zone, you really can't talk about animals of the temperate zone without addressing terrestrial leeches. When the monsoon rains set in April, these little guys come out of hiding, make their way up onto little branches or leaves and dangle themselves there, waiting for the first unaware animal or human to walk by. They latch onto that animal or person, move around, find some bear skin, and tap in for a nice blood meal. A real deterrent to doing field work in that part of the world at that time. Nonetheless, I was determined to do so, and so I figured out ways for me and my crew to work in the field. It resulted in basically hand plucking the leeches off of us. Here you have a half-liter bottle that I filled with leeches plucked from my clothes and my body over a 3-month period. That story can go on for a long time too, but we need to keep moving here. So these are some of the charismatic megafauna of the temperate zone. These animals, as you might guess, are difficult to get good photographs. It takes either a very intensive project to get photographs of these, or a lot of luck, of which I've not experienced either. And so I get my make-do photographs are from zoos. Here you have the Himalayan black bear, Indian leopard, the Bhutan takin, and the Himalayan goral. These two are in a group called goat antelopes, and they're certainly the takin is only found in Bhutan and There's another takin that's found in southwest China. Fascinating animals. Also, amongst the mammals, you have a diversity of what are now called leaf monkeys or langurs. Here you have the golden langur, who is endemic to Bhutan and adjoining areas of Assam. This is the capped langur, and then you have the gray langur. Then getting onto the birds of the temperate zones, you have a diversity of pheasants. This is the group that originally was largely responsible for my interest in that part of the world. So here you can see even within one species called the college pheasant, these are subspecies. As you go from east to west or vice versa, in the Himalaya, you see these different subspecies replacing each other. Here you have the black-backed college, black back, white breast. This is the female of the black-backed. The black-breasted college, white back, black breast. The Nepal college, white back, white breast. Very handy for field identification. You also have tragopans. This is the satyr tragopan that I recently photographed in Bhutan using a very high ISO. I need to doctor this picture up a little bit. Haven't had the time. Or maybe I won't need to, because this March I've just finished booking a trip back to Bhutan to photograph the tragopans of Bhutan. There are actually 3 species that birding guides in Bhutanese birding guides have figured out where to find them and how to get photographs of them. There are actually 5 species of tragopans in the genus. There's one in the Western Himalayas and another in South China. But I'm very much looking forward to seeing these and photographing these tragopans in the wild in Bhutan. Also in the temperate zone, you have these corvids. The raven is the national bird of Bhutan. You have the large-billed crow. You have yellow-billed blue magpie and tree pie. I'm a total sucker for long-tailed birds. So I've always looked forward to getting pictures of blue magpies. There's a yellow bill and there's also a red bill, and there are some 5 species of tree pies in the region. These are not my best photos. I'm looking forward to having another. This is not my best work, I should say. I can do better, and I'm looking forward to doing that in the near future, this March. The columbids, the doves and pigeons, are very well represented in that region. Some of you will recognize these names: spotted dove, oriental turtle dove, rock dove, Eurasian collared dove. These are all native to that part of the world, but in fact, they have been introduced to other parts of the world. In Southern California, we have all of these. In the Hawaiian Islands, you have all of these. This rock dove is what we commonly refer to as the city pigeon. It's native and wild in the Himalaya region. Moving on to the Coracia forms again, these heavy-billed birds. You have a temperate hornbill called the rufous-necked hornbill, a rare species. This one photographed in Bhutan. You have woodpeckers like this crimson-breasted and this gray-headed. You also have Asian barbets, a different family, Megalamidae, referring to their big bills. The voice of the great barbet is really characteristic of the hill country of the Himalaya. This loud, very clear voice. I can't reproduce it, and I'm struggling to describe it, but it's kind of the soundtrack of the middle hills of the Himalayas. That brings us to the babblers. When I first started studying and learning the birds of the region, the babblers were this huge group with literally hundreds of species, very diverse. There were different groups of babblers. It was hard to understand how or why they would be put together. And of course, all of that taxonomy was based on plumage and song and some natural history features. But as you're all aware, the molecular geneticists have been busy at work with birds, and they've really done a job, you can say, on the Asian babblers. So there was a lot of reorganization of the babblers. There were new families that were created. Certain of the original babbler family was the Timoleidae. There are Timoleids that wound up in completely different existing families, totally unexpectedly, etc. So we'll start with the laughing thrushes, the Leothrichidae. Palomaly, India's famous father of Indian ornithology, has written that the most characteristic bird families of the Himalaya are the pheasants and the laughing thrushes. And so here are examples of laughing thrushes. You've got the black-faced, spotted, the white-throated, the striated, the white-crested, rufous-necked, red-faced Leochichla. The jungle babbler is in fact a laughing thrush. The rufous cibia, the cibias are also laughing thrushes, even though anatomically they look fairly different. Genetically, they fit into that Leochichlidae. These other ones were formerly in the Timoleid babbler, that big Timoleid babbler group, and got broken out in various ways. The parrotbills, like this great parrotbill, wound up in the family Paradox ornithidae. And these, what used to be called wren babblers, but because we don't want to call them babblers anymore, now called cupwings, they are in their own family called the I knew I would not get this right. Pygostyle, no pygidae, thank you. And the euhennates, like this whiskered euhenna, turned out, according to molecular genetics, to actually be not babblers, but white eyes in Zosteropidae. And in fact, now that you mention it, it does have a nice white eye, doesn't it? You still have some of the old babblers that have remained in the traditional Timoleidae group, like these scimitar babblers, the rusty-cheeked and the slender-billed scimitar babbler. And then, possibly most fascinatingly, regarding break up the babblers, is you had these species that were named shrike babblers. The name shrike the word shrike has been appended to many, birds, anything that needed a pigeonhole, a slot to be put in. If it had a hooked tip to its bill and a white stripe around its eye, it was kind of shrike-like looking, because all shrikes, as you may know, have that hooked bill and the white stripe through their eye. And so when these, were thought to be babblers at the time, were named, they thought, oh, well, they're kind of shrike-like, so we'll call them shrike babblers. Well, it turns out they're not babblers at all. The molecular geneticists have shown us that they're actually vireonids. They're vireos, most closely related to the North American vireos. Another very diverse family in the Himalayas is the bulbuls, the Pycnonotidae. There's the gray bulbul, mountain bulbul, red-vented bulbul. Some of you, obviously, if you're listening in from India, you're very familiar with the red-vented bulbul. If you're listening in from California, you may recognize the name of this because it has been introduced. It was a popular cage bird. They have a beautiful song. And so very often those cage birds with beautiful songs and kind of generalist diets, when they got out of the cage, they did fine in the wild. And that's the case with the red-vented bulbul. You'll find them in the big cities of Southern California. You'll find them in Hawaii, the red-vented bulbul. And then that brings us to a very diverse group, the Muscicapidae, the old world flycatchers, often referred to as chats or redstarts and such. This is the plumeous water redstart. Here we have the Himalayan bluetail, one of many what used to be called blue flycatchers. They're always a challenge for me to learn to distinguish. They're gorgeous birds, but some of the species have fairly similar plumage. Hodgkin's redstart, gray bush chat. This birded or flycatcher is more typical of a kind of a flycatcher anatomy here. It's part of that, the old world, more typical of what you might expect of a flycatcher in this family of old world flycatchers. But also you have this group The slaty-backed forktail, or the forktails, species that are very closely associated with streams right near the water. This is the slaty-backed forktail. It is also a musky capit. Also, in the temperate, you have many thrushes, family Turdidae. In the old world, they call these blackbirds. So here you have the white-collared blackbird, the white-winged blackbird, and possibly one of my favorite Himalayan birds, the blue whistling thrush. Again, these up here are called blackbirds. But when you hear the Beatles, the musical group the Beatles singing blackbird singing in the dead of night, they're not talking about our North American icterid blackbirds, a completely different family. They're talking about a thrush, a turdid blackbird from the old world. Other families you'll find in the temperate zone, you've got the Indicatoridae, this yellow-rumped honey guide, so named because it guides mammals, including humans, to a bee's hive so that the mammal will tear the hive up to get the honey, and then the honey guides will then be able to feast on the little baby wasps and bees that are left behind. There are two dippers, Cichlidae, in the Himalaya region, the white-breasted and this brown dipper. As many, if not all of you know, it's unique amongst the passerines for having wing-powered swimming. It swims underwater by stroking its wings, and that's how it finds its food in streams. There's quite a diversity of shrikes, the Laniidae in that area. Here's the hooked bill and the white on the face that I mentioned that is characteristic of shrikes. There are also a large diversity of parrots, tits, like this yellow-cheeked tit, several species of nuthatch, like the chestnut-bellied, several species of drongos, Dracouridae. This is a typical Asian group, although they may extend down into Africa. My African ornithology is not very good, actually, but they're pretty characteristic of open areas in Himalayan forests. A great diversity of sunbirds in the temperate region, like this Mrs. Gold. Sunbirds all have this iridescent, beautiful iridescent color. Many of them have long tails. You also have the minivets, this gray-chinned minivet. Minivets got reorganized recently by the molecular geneticists. They're now in the caterpillar-eating family, the Capifaggidae, Campifaggidae. You also have a number of warblers, a great diversity of warblers in the temperate regions of the Himalaya, actually. And this group, the warbler group, what were traditionally called warblers, had been very much reorganized using new genetic techniques. You now have a group called the leaf warblers, commonly called the leaf warblers, like this gray-cheeked warbler and the yellow-vinded warbler. You also have a newly created family, the bush warblers, Cytidae, and this little guy, this beautiful little guy, black-faced warbler, that looks a whole lot like these Phylloscopidae up here, but it turns out that it's actually part of the bush warbler group. There are many fringillids in the area, finches of various kinds, grosbeaks, but none of them as strikingly, outlandishly colored as the scarlet finch. That takes us then up to the alpine regions of the Himalaya. For the most part, we can say broadly throughout these three countries, if you're wanting to spend time in alpine environments doing birding, you're probably going to wind up doing some kind of trekking. There isn't very good automobile access to these areas, maybe right up to the edge of it, but in general, you will be able to take a road or use a local little airstrip to get to the entry gate of these parks. But if you want to get up in there and really explore and see a lot of alpine environment and animals, you're going to have to do some trekking. I wouldn't let that prospect discourage you. Trekking in the Himalayas is an absolutely amazing activity. Your tour guide will set up crew to carry your tents, your kitchen, your food along with you. You will be treated to incredible luxury on the trail. And so I highly recommend, actually, if your health will support it, that you go to these high elevation parks and do a little Himalayan trekking. So in Nepal, then it's going to be these large national parks right along the Tibetan border. In Sikkim, you've got another large national park, the Kanchenjunga. That actually is divided. The Kanchenjunga range, it falls both in eastern Nepal and western Sikkim. There are a couple of alpine locations that you can get to by road, Lachen, Lacheng, and Tsomgo Lake. Unfortunately, right now, the roads to these two sites have been washed out, but they will probably be open again in the near future. Tsomgo Lake will take you over to Nathula, where you're right on the border with Tibet. For alpine areas in Bhutan, again, you'll get on the east-west highway, and there are little branch roads that head north off of that road that will take you up to subalpine and just get a glimpse of kind of alpine environments. If you want to really get out and be in alpine environments, you will need to do some trekking. Here are some typical scenes that you'll see in the alpine of the Himalaya, central Himalaya. This is the Annapurna Range and the Kaligandaki River in central Nepal. This is Mount Everest right here. This is the Everest region, Sagarmatha National Park. This is the Khumbu Glacier, which this picture was taken in '82. My understanding is all of the Himalayan glaciers have receded seriously. Where I'm standing right here is a site known as Kalapatar, the highest elevation I've personally reached, 19,500 feet. Here's a view of the Kanchenjunga range from the Sikkim side. When you're traveling in these high elevations, when you go through villages or go across passes, you'll find these kind of this cultural art, if you will. This is known as a mani wall. These are prayers that usually a wealthy person has established there, had created in order to bestow passersby with the well wishes of these prayers. Similarly, with prayer flags, there are Tibetan prayers, Buddhist prayers printed in Tibetan script on these flags. They blow in the wind, the theory being that the well wishes of those prayers go downwind and are helpful to people downwind. Some selected alpine species, you've got this Himalayan tahr, another goat antelope. You've got snow leopard. This is the best snow leopard picture in my collection. It's from a zoo. It's from the Gangtok Zoo. The prospects of me ever getting a really good snow leopard picture are unlikely. Although I must say that my friends with Karma Quest Tours, who I'll be talking about in a minute, do snow leopard tours to Ladakh and have a very good success rate for seeing them. But seeing them and getting a top quality picture of them is two different things. And of course, then we have the Yeti. This is thought to be a Yeti scalp by the local people. Scientists from the Smithsonian Institution came to this monastery many, many years ago, soon after Nepal opened, I believe, and took a snip of hair, took her back to the Smithsonian Museum and determined it to be Tibetan blue bear, which is a subspecies of brown bear, which did not diminish the importance or value of this relic for the local people. You do have quite a diversity of pikas or mouse hairs throughout the Himalayas, including this little guy here that I photographed at the base of Mount Everest. You have some gorgeous pheasants in the alpine of Himalaya, and they're very highly regarded by local folks. The Himalayan manal is the national bird of Nepal. Here's a female. The blood pheasant is the state bird of Sikkim. There's a female of it. You also have other gallinaceous birds like the Tibetan snowcock and Himalayan snowcock. There are actually 5 species of snowcock in the Central Asian, high Central Asian mountains. 2 of them occur in the Himalaya. You also have a little guy called the snow partridge there that I'm looking forward to getting a better picture of. You will see this, in addition to big griffon vultures, you will see this bearded vulture there, also known as lammergeier or bone breaker. It has a habit of carrying the bones of deceased animals up into the air, dropping them down onto rocks, breaking them, and then going down and foraging on the marrow, as in the bones. You have corvids in the alpine, like this chough, red-billed chough. You have your Asian nutcrackers. You have snow pigeons beautifying the area with these flocks of black and white birds flying around. You have this family, the Prunellidae of accentors that live at very high elevations. This alpine accentor I photographed at about 12,000 feet. The robin accentor I photographed at about 15,000 feet. You also have blue-fronted redstart in this environment, white-browed fulvetta that is now a member of the parrotbill family. And you have quite a diversity of tits, of parrots, gray-chested here, yellow-browed, rufous-finted, and coal-tit. Wrapping up then my survey of birds here, I want to talk about some passage migrants that aren't necessarily associated with the subtropical or alpine. They move up and down these deep river gorges seasonally. The breeding season, they're up on the Tibetan Plateau generally. Winter, they're down around the wetlands at the base of the Himalayas. The booted eagle is an example of that, greater spotted eagle, common stone chat, dark-throated thrush. These are all passage migrants. The ruddy shelduck is a passage migrant. In spring, you'll see it up on the Tibetan Plateau on the ponds and lakes there. You'll see it in the Himalayan rivers when it's moving through, and you'll see it in large numbers down on the Terai in winter. I'll close my survey of birds then with the ibis bill. This was a Ibidorhynchidae. It's the only member of its family. It's unique to that region, breeds up on the Tibetan Plateau, maybe as far north as Siberia, migrates down the rivers of the Himalayas and spends the winter down at the base of the Himalayas. When I first arrived in the Himalayas, I was very anxious to go out and get pictures of them because I had just freshly learned about the existence of the family when I graduated from college and took an advanced ornithology course called the Bird Families of the World. All right, so let's wrap this up, talking a little bit about the kind of permit requirements you will be looking at if you choose to go birding in this part of the world, and I hope you will. First, let me say in general that for your best birding experience, you should use a tour agent that specializes in birding. Your tour agent will acquire the necessary permits and deal with all of the bureaucracy, and there's plenty of it in getting those permits. In general, I should say that the kind of travel that I did 30 years ago basically doesn't happen anymore. Individual travel is increasingly discouraged and in fact is sometimes prohibited. In Nepal, for example, you'll arrive with your visa. You can get visa on entry if you choose. But if you want to go into national parks and protected areas, you will have to hire a professional guide to take you there. In Sikkim, you'll arrive with your Indian visa. You go to the Sikkim border and apply for a Sikkim travel card and be issued one on the spot. If you're planning on going to restricted areas, protected areas, or going on formal trekking, you're going to need additional permits. Do keep in mind that all of the high elevation areas are restricted areas because they're right on the Chinese border. In Bhutan, there essentially is no independent travel. You must join a group and you must use the approved 3-star or better lodging. This is in accordance with the philosophy that Bhutan started its tourism industry in the mid-70s of high value, low impact tourism. And take my word for it, you will it'll be a great experience for you, definitely high value. Last slide. Here's a list of tour agents you might consider. These I have called the premium companies. I don't have any personal experience with any of these. This was a list that I developed from internet searches. They all have, they do work in multiple countries and use local experts to lead. In addition to those, I have what I call my homegrown contacts. There is KarmaQuest, owned by Colonel Lama and his wife, Wendy Brewer Lama. They have been leading nature and ecotourism travel in that region, actually throughout Asia for decades. They're personal friends. They will set you up with whatever kind of tour you want to do based on their experience, and also the fact that Karma is a local. He's Sikkimese by birth. He has family and business going there. Specific to Bhutan, I can highly recommend Bhutan Birding and Heritage Travels. It's the group I used last year and we'll use again this year. Their field guides are wonderful people, very good at getting you on the birds, and just a delightful group of people to work with. The last thing there, then on the bottom, and I guess Bob said he was going to provide this information as well. But if you want to follow my photography or my travels, you can find me as Bland Wildlife on both Facebook and Instagram. All right, Bob, that's it.